The Ridge Home Asylum has been abandoned for decades, but its reputation still loomed large over the town of Arvada, Colorado. Locals whispered about the atrocities that had taken place within its walls, stories of mistreatment, failed experiments, and the restless spirits of patients who have never left. For Jenna, the allure of the asylum was irresistible. A self-proclaimed urban explorer, she was always chasing the thrill of the unknown, and crumbling remains of Ridge Home felt like the ultimate conquest. On a crisp autumn evening, she parked her car near the edge of the property and slipped through a gap in the rusted chain-link fence. The asylum loomed ahead, its facade cracked and weathered, windows like empty eyes staring into the void. The air was cold, the kind of chill that seemed to seep from the ground itself. Jenna stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The interior was a maze of decayed walls and broken furniture. Graffiti covered what remained of the plaster, and the floor creaked beneath her boots. Each step echoed through the hollow halls, making her hyper-aware of the stillness around her. She wandered through the asylum, snapping photos of peeling paint and rusted gurneys. In one room, she found an overturned wheelchair, its wheels frozen in place as though time itself had abandoned it. The longer she stayed, the heavier the air became, thick with an inexplicable tension. Jenna ventured deeper into the building, eventually reaching the basement. The air here was damp and musty, carrying a faint metallic tang that made her stomach turn. The flashlight's beam caught old medical equipment scattered across the floor, tools that looked more suited for torture than treatment. She took a photo, her camera's flash illuminating the space for a brief moment. And that's when she heard it, a faint shuffle like footsteps dragging across the floor. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound came again, closer this time. Her flashlight darted across the room, but nothing moved. She told herself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat, but the hairs on her neck told a different story. Then, from somewhere deeper in the basement, came a low, guttural moan. It reverberated through the concrete walls, unmistakably human yet distorted, as if it came from a throat long unused. Jenna's pulse quickened, and she stumbled backwards, her flashlight trembling in her hand. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye. A shadow, a figure hunched and unnatural, emerged from the darkness. It didn't move like a person, its limbs jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. The flashlight flickered, plunging her into a momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. When the light returned, the figure was gone, but the moaning grew louder, now echoing from every direction. Panic overtook her, and Jenna ran, her boots pounding against the cracked tile floor. The halls twisted and blurred, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she was even heading towards the exit. Finally, she burst outside, gasping for air, her heart racing. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, the asylum shrinking in her rearview mirror as she sped away. Later that night, she reviewed the photos on her camera. Most were as she expected, dark, eerie images of decayed walls and abandoned furniture. But one made her blood run cold. In the photo of a wheelchair, a shadowy figure stood in the background, its hollow eyes fixed on the lens. The dense canopy of trees loomed overhead as Clara stepped out into the shadowy remains of Dudleytown, Connecticut. The village, long abandoned and rumored to be cursed, was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Clara had heard the whispers about this place, a town said to have brought ruin to all who lived there. But as an amateur historian, she couldn't resist the lure of exploring its decayed remnants. The trail was overgrown, winding to the forest like a forgotten vein. Clara clutched her camera tightly, snapping photos of crumbled stone foundations half swallowed by moss. The air felt heavier here, as though the forest itself was pressing down on her. Every now and then she thought she heard faint whispers, but they were always too faint to discern. A trick of the wind, she told herself. As she reached what appeared to be the ruins of an old home, Clara stopped. The stones were blackened, as if touched by fire, and the surrounding trees seemed to lean unnaturally towards the structure. She raised her camera, but when she did, a sudden chill swept through the air. It was kind of cold that sank into your bones, unnatural for the time of the year. Her finger hovered over the shutter button when she caught movement in her peripheral vision. She turned sharply, her flashlight sweeping the dense forests. Nothing. But that uneasy feeling lingered, a weight that settled deep in her chest. She decided to keep moving. As she walked, the woods grew darker, as though the sun itself had been blotted out. The trail began to disappear, and Clara realized she wasn't sure where she had entered. She checked her phone for GPS, but the signal was gone. Frustration turned to unease when she noticed something else. The whispers had returned, faint but consistent, as if carried on a breeze she couldn't feel. She quickened her pace, the crunch of leaves underfoot seemingly too loud in the oppressive silence. The forest felt alive, every branch and shadow watching her. Then she saw it, an unnatural figure standing in the distance, shrouded in the dim light. It was tall, featureless, and impossibly still, blending into the shadows, yet undeniably there. Claire froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figures didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, as if emanating from all directions. Panic took hold, and she turned, running blindly through the woods. Branches clawed at her arms, and the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. She didn't stop until she burst into a clearing, gasping for breath. The ruins were gone, the trees standing silent and still. Her phone buzzed faintly as she regained signal, and she realized she was back near her car. She glanced behind her, half expecting to see the figure pursuing her, but the forest was empty. Driving away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had been watched the entire time. Later, when she reviewed her camera, the photos of Dudleytown were inexplicably dark, each frame obscured by shadows. The mist hung thick over the Delaware River as Noah approached Fort Delaware, its stone walls rising out of the water like a forgotten relic. The fort had been abandoned for over a century, and the rumors surrounding it were as old as the structure itself. Locals spoke of strange lights, eerie sounds, and the restless spirits of soldiers who had died in the fort's prison during the Civil War. Noah wasn't one buying into the ghost stories, though, but something about the fort's long, tragic history pulled him in. He had to see it for himself. He arrived just before sunset, eager to explore before darkness fully set in. A small boat had ferried him across to the island. As he disembarked, he could already feel the weight of the place pressing down on him. The fort loomed ahead, its stone walls cracked and worn by time, the air around it thick with the scent of decay. Noah's flashlight illuminated the path ahead of him as he stepped closer to the entrance. The massive wooden doors creaked as he pushed them open, revealing the darkness within. The floors groaned beneath his boots as he ventured deeper into the fort, his flashlight beam dancing across the long abandoned barracks, storage rooms, and prison cells. He snapped a few photos, the eerie silence overwhelming him with each click of the shutter. It wasn't long before Noah noticed something unsettling. The air grew colder the further he ventured inside. His breath became visible, hanging in the air like fog. And then, faintly, he heard it, the soft shuffle of footsteps behind him. He spun around, but the corridor was empty, nothing but crumbling walls and faded paint. He stood still for a moment, listening, but the sound of the footsteps was gone. He continued down the hall, passing an old cell that had long been left untouched. As he approached, he noticed the bars. The rusted metal was chipped, but the unmistakable shape of a figure seemed to stand behind them, too still, too quiet. Noah's heart skipped a beat, his flashlight flickered again, and in the brief moment of darkness, the figure seemed to move, its outline becoming clearer in the beam of light. It wasn't a person, though. It was a shape, featureless and shadowy, a silhouette of something that didn't belong. His breath quickened, panic creeping into his chest. He backed away, his foot catching on something, sending a loud crash through the stillness of the fort. Noah stumbled to his feet, and he turned and ran, the sound of the unseen footsteps echoing in the halls behind him, always just a few steps too close. He didn't stop until he reached the front gate, gasping for air. The boat was waiting for him, and he scrambled aboard, the mist swirling around the island as if trying to swallow him whole. As the boat drifted away from Fort Delaware, Noah cast one final look at the silhouette of the fort, its stone walls looming against the darkened sky. The warm night air wrapped around Key West like a velvet cloak as the neon sign for Captain Tony's Saloon flickered in the darkness. Tourists and locals alike crowded the bar, their laughter and shadows echoing against the aged brick walls. Beneath the saloon's wooden floor, however, a darker story lingered, one whispered among patrons with hushed tones and wary glances. Years ago, during renovations to transform the building into the iconic saloon it is today, workers uncovered human remains beneath the floorboards. Among the bones, they found an iron ring, rusted and ancient, still embedded in the stone wall, a relic of an era when the building served as a morgue and an execution site. The locals spoke of a woman accused of murdering her husband who had been chained to that very wall to await her fate. Some say she cursed the ground with her final breath. Tonight, the air in the saloon seemed heavier, as if the past had seeped into the present. A shadow moved along the wall, fleeting and shapeless. A waitress balancing a tray of drinks stumbled, as if something had tugged at her ankle. Glass shattered on the floor as a gust of cold air brushed through the room. The jukebox, silenced moments before, clicked to life, playing a haunting melody no one had selected. The regulars exchanged knowing glances. It wasn't the first time strange occurrences had disrupted the bar's lively atmosphere, and it wouldn't be the last. Captain Tony's Saloon wasn't just a place to drink. It was a portal to the island's shadowy history, a place where spirits lingered, watching as life carried on above their restless graves. The moon hung high over Lake Lanier, its silver light casting an eerie glow across the rippling surface. The reservoir, vast and still, seemed to breathe with an unseen life. Swimmers and boaters had long since retreated, leaving the lake quiet but for the occasional rustle of trees or the distant cry of a bird. But beneath the calm exterior, the lake hid a history that refused to rest. Decades earlier, entire towns had been submerged when the reservoir was created. Homes, churches, cemeteries. The remnants of those communities still lay beneath the murky water, frozen in time. Locals whispered of strange happenings, unexplained drownings, ghostly figures walking across the water, and icy hands tugging at swimmers from below. That night, a lone fisherman sat in a small boat near the center of the lake. He cast his line into the dark water, the gentle plunk breaking the silence. Hours passed with little activity, and he began to doze off, lulled by the rhythmic rocking of the boat. Suddenly, the line jerked violently, pulling him awake. He gripped his rod, struggling against whatever massive force had taken the bait. The boat tipped dangerously as he fought, his hands burning against the reel. But then, just as abruptly as it began, the tension disappeared. He peered over the edge, heart pounding. The water seemed to swirl unnaturally, darker than before. A chill crept through the air, sending goosebumps up his arms. Beneath the surface, something moved, an outline of what seemed like a human figure, arms outstretched as if reaching for him. Panicked, the fisherman scrambled to start his motor. The engine sputtered before roaring to life, and he sped towards the shore, refusing to look back. When he reached land, he turned to face the lake one last time. The water was still again, calm and unassuming, as though nothing had happened. But he knew better. The legends of Lake Lanier weren't just stories. Something was down there, waiting.